The cargo ship Aurora's Hope floated through the dark and endless space, its silver frame glowing faintly under distant starlight. The crew slept in their quarters, tired from long days of rescue work. But one section of the ship remained restless, the nursery. Inside, soft blue lights glowed over a group of small alien cubs who cried without pause. Their thin, high-pitched voices echoed through the metal walls, filling the hallway with sorrow. The cubs came from a planet called Ilara 9, a green world now half broken by storms. Their habitat dome had fallen and many of their kind had perished. These few survivors, tiny, frightened, and trembling, were being taken to a new colony. The ship's medical team had done their best to care for them, but nothing worked. The cubs refused food, ignored the warmth blankets, and cried until their little bodies shook with exhaustion. In the lower deck, far from the noise, a man named Tom Reeves sat on a small stool with a mop beside him. He was the ship's janitor, a man in his late 30s with tired eyes and a calm face. His job was simple: keep the ship clean, fix small messes, and stay out of the way. But that night, the sound of the cubs' cries reached even his corner of the ship. Tom sighed and rubbed his face. "Poor things," he muttered. "They sound heartbroken." He glanced down the long hallway. The soft crying continued, faint but steady. The crew had already tried everything: music, light therapy, even scent diffusers. Nothing helped. Tom stood up slowly, picked up his cleaning cloth, and started walking toward the sound. When he reached the nursery door, two medics stood outside, looking tired and helpless. "They've been at it for hours," one said. "Every time we leave they start again." Tom looked through the glass window. Inside, a group of small creatures huddled together on the padded floor. They had soft fur like velvet, big glowing eyes, and tiny fingers that reached for one another but never found comfort. "Mind if I try something?" Tom asked quietly. The medics exchanged a glance. You're not trained for this, Mr. Reeves?" He gave a small smile. "Maybe not. But I've had some experience with crying babies back home. Sometimes it's not about training, it's about patience." After a short pause, the medics nodded and opened the door. Warm air and the sound of crying rushed out. Tom stepped inside, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. The cubs stopped for just a second to look at him, a tall human with messy hair and a soft expression. He crouched down so his eyes were level with theirs. "Hey there," he said softly. "What's all this noise about, huh? You keeping the whole ship awake?" The cubs didn't understand his words, but they seemed to sense something in his tone. Their cries softened slightly, replaced by tiny sniffles and uncertain chirps. Tom slowly sat on the floor. The nursery was warm, almost too warm, filled with the soft hum of machines that kept the air rich with oxygen. He noticed one cub trembling alone in the corner, its fur damp from tears. Without thinking twice, Tom reached for a nearby blanket and gently picked the little one up. The cub tensed at first but didn't pull away. There, he murmured. "You're all right now. I've got you." He wrapped the cub carefully, cradling it in his arms. The small creature blinked up at him, confused but calmer. Tom smiled and began to hum softly, a simple tune, slow and steady. It was an old song his mother used to hum when he couldn't sleep as a child. The melody drifted through the air like a warm breeze. It wasn't loud, just gentle enough to fill the space. The cub in his arms blinked once, then twice, and gave a small sigh. Its glowing eyes slowly closed. One by one the other cubs stopped crying. They looked at the man with the deep voice and the soft song. A few crawled closer, curious. Soon, several of them were resting against his legs, curling up in small groups, their breathing slowing. Outside the glass window, the medics stared in disbelief. "What's he doing?" one whispered. "Nothing special," the other replied quietly. "Just singing." Tom didn't notice their faces. He just kept humming, rocking the cub in his arms back and forth. "That's it," he whispered. "You're safe now. No more storms. Just sleep." Minutes turned into an hour, but Tom didn't stop. The nursery became completely still, filled only with the sound of his low humming. Every cub had fallen asleep, their tiny bodies pressed together in peace. Tom leaned his head back against the wall and let out a slow breath. His voice was rough now, but he smiled anyway. "Guess you just needed a bit of music," he said quietly. When he finally stepped out, the medics looked at him with amazement. "What did you do?" one asked. Tom shrugged. "Nothing fancy. Just an old earth lullaby. My mom used to say music can make even the darkest night feel like home." The medics smiled faintly. "You might have saved our mission tonight." Tom chuckled softly as he walked back toward his cleaning cart. "Didn't save anything," he said. "Just gave the little ones a song." That night, The ship floated on in silence, its engines purring softly against the vast emptiness of space. Inside the nursery, the cubs slept peacefully for the first time since they had boarded. Their soft breathing filled the room like the rhythm of calm waves. And down the hall, the janitor hummed to himself as he swept the floors, unaware that somewhere behind him tiny ears twitched at the sound, remembering the tune that had made them feel safe. He didn't know it yet, but his small act of kindness would be remembered long after Aurora's hope reached its destination. Sometimes the galaxy didn't need heroes with blasters or scientists with theories. Sometimes it just needed a janitor with a gentle song. Tom knelt beside the smallest cub, the one that had been crying the longest. Its fur was damp and tangled, its tiny body trembling as if the warmth in the room couldn't reach it. The soft lights above flickered faintly, casting gentle shadows across the nursery floor. Tom looked around at the others, small round creatures with bright eyes and soft tails, curled up in groups but still whimpering softly. The air was full of tired, sad sounds that made his chest ache. He reached for one of the blankets folded neatly on the shelf and shook it out. The fabric was warm from the heat vents, soft as silk. "Hey there," he murmured, his voice low and kind. "You must be freezing." The cub didn't understand the words, but it seemed to sense his tone. Its cries slowed to soft hiccups. Tom carefully lifted the little creature, wrapping it snugly in the blanket until only its nose peeked out. The cub blinked up at him, its eyes glowing faint blue in the dim light. "There we go," he whispered. "Better?" The cub made a tiny chirp, not a cry this time, more like a question. Tom smiled faintly. He sat cross-legged on the padded floor, holding the bundle close. Around him the other cubs watched quietly. Their eyes followed his every move, curious and cautious. He looked down at the small face in his arms and a memory came back. A rainy night on Earth, the sound of water tapping against his old window, and his mother humming in the next room. He had been 6 years old and afraid of thunder. His mother had sat beside his bed, humming a slow song that made the whole world feel softer. Without thinking, Tom began to hum that same tune. The sound was quiet, low and warm. It rolled gently through the air like a calm breeze. The melody didn't belong to any language, just simple sounds that carried comfort. The cub blinked up at him again. Its small chest rose and fell slowly, the tension leaving its body. Tom kept humming, his voice steady. The tune filled the room, bouncing softly off the walls. Soon, another cub crawled closer, dragging its blanket behind it. It made a small sound, a tiny whine, then curled up beside his leg. Tom smiled and kept humming. The rhythm was steady and sure, like the beating of a heart. The noise in the nursery began to fade. One by one the cubs stopped crying. They moved closer in small steps, drawn to the warmth of his voice. Within minutes, Tom found himself surrounded by little sleeping bundles, all breathing quietly in the dim light. He looked around in surprise. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. "Didn't think you'd like Earth music." Outside the glass window, 2 medics had stopped in their tracks. They stared through the clear wall at the sight, the human janitor sitting in the middle of the nursery, a group of alien cubs curled up around him like kittens. The sound of his humming came faintly through the intercom. "Is that working?" one medic whispered. The other nodded slowly, eyes wide. "It's working better than anything we've tried." Inside, Tom finished the last few notes of the lullaby, his voice barely above a whisper. He didn't want to stop, not yet. The cubs were so peaceful now, their tiny chests rising and falling in time with his breathing. He shifted slightly, careful not to wake the one sleeping in his lap. It stirred a little but didn't cry. Tom smiled softly and brushed a hand over its fur. "You're safe now," he said. "No storms, no loud noises. Just dreams." He looked around the quiet room, the soft hum of machines mixing with the faint sound of his voice. Something about the moment made him feel lighter, like the ship wasn't just metal and engines anymore, but a small piece of something living. Minutes passed. Tom leaned back against the wall and let his eyes close for a moment, still humming softly. He didn't notice the captain standing at the window now, watching silently. When Tom finally stopped, the room stayed quiet. The cubs didn't wake. The soft rhythm of their breathing filled the space. The captain stepped inside, moving slowly so as not to disturb the peace. "Mr. Reeves?" she whispered. Tom looked up, startled. "Oh, Captain. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She raised a hand. "Don't apologize. Whatever you're doing, it's remarkable." He chuckled softly. "Just an old song. My mom used to hum it when I couldn't sleep." The captain looked around at the sleeping cubs, her expression soft. "It seems it works across species." Tom shrugged. Guess comfort sounds the same no matter where you're from. The captain nodded slowly. I think you just earned yourself a new job, Mr. Reeves. Tom blinked. You mean? She smiled. You'll still be our janitor, but from now on, you're also our official caretaker for the young. Clearly they trust you. He looked down at the small creature in his arms, now snoring faintly. A quiet laugh escaped him. I suppose I can live with that. The captain left quietly, leaving him with the cubs. Tom leaned his head back and stared at the ceiling. The hum of the engines vibrated faintly through the floor, steady and familiar. He thought about his mother again, how she used to say kindness was the strongest language in the universe. Back then he had laughed. Now, sitting on a distant starship surrounded by sleeping alien children, he began to think she might have been right. He yawned softly, careful not to disturb the cubs. All right, little ones, he murmured, voice heavy with sleep. Let's all get some rest. Big day tomorrow. He didn't know that outside the nursery half the ship's crew had gathered by the window, watching in quiet awe. They saw something they couldn't explain. A human and a group of alien cubs, breathing in the same rhythm, sharing peace. No one spoke. No one dared to break the silence. For the first time since the rescue, the ship was completely still. And somewhere in that stillness, under the faint hum of engines and the glow of distant stars, the universe seemed a little softer, because one man had remembered an old Earth song and decided to share it. By morning, the story had spread through every deck of Aurora's Hope. The engineers whispered it over breakfast, the pilots repeated it in the control room, and the medics were already reviewing recordings from the nursery. The words traveled fast. The human janitor calmed the cubs. It was almost unbelievable. For weeks, trained specialists had failed to soothe the alien young. They had used sound frequencies, light patterns, and even gravity adjustments, but nothing had worked. And yet, one man with no training had done it with a song. Tom Reeves woke up that morning with no idea that half the ship was talking about him. He stretched, washed his face, and went back to his cleaning route as usual. When he arrived at the main corridor, 2 scientists were waiting by his cart. They looked excited and a little nervous. Mr. Reeves, one of them said quickly. We've been looking for you. Could you come to the nursery for a moment? Tom blinked, holding his mop. Did something happen? No, the other scientist said. Everything's fine. We just need to observe what you did last night. Tom sighed, but he followed them anyway. He didn't like attention, but he cared about the cubs. As they entered the nursery, he saw the small creatures sleeping quietly under the warm light. Their fur shimmered faintly, soft breaths rising and falling in rhythm. One cub lifted its head and squeaked when it saw him. It crawled toward the edge of its bed and made a soft sound, almost like a purr. Tom smiled and crouched down. Hey there, little one, he whispered. You're up early. Immediately, 2 more cubs woke and began moving toward him. Soon, all of them were awake and gathered around his feet, chittering softly. The scientists watched from behind a transparent screen. One of them took notes while another recorded the sound. Their heart rates are dropping, one whispered. They're calmer just by hearing his voice. Tom didn't pay attention to the equipment. He sat cross-legged on the floor as the cubs climbed into his lap. You missed me, huh? He said with a chuckle. I missed you too. He began to hum again, the same song as before. The cubs' eyes closed one by one. The room filled with that gentle melody, a simple earth tune, soft and steady, almost like a heartbeat. When he finished, the scientist stepped closer. Mr. Reeves, said the older one, do you realize what's happening here? The cubs respond to you in a way we've never seen before. Tom scratched the back of his neck. Guess they just needed a little comfort. The younger scientist shook her head. No, it's more than that. We scanned them while you were humming. Their stress levels dropped nearly 80%. That's unheard of. Tom looked at the sleeping cub in his arms. They're just scared, he said simply. Sometimes you don't need fancy tech or special skills. You just need to hold them and let them know they're safe. The scientists exchanged glances. One of them smiled faintly. You make it sound simple. Tom shrugged. Maybe it is. By noon, the captain herself called him to the command deck. The message said, report to the bridge when convenient. Tom wasn't sure what that meant for a janitor, but he went anyway. The bridge was bright and quiet, with large windows showing endless stars. The captain, a tall woman with silver streaks in her dark hair, turned as he entered. Mr. Reeves, she said warmly. You've caused quite a stir. Tom looked confused. I hope not the bad kind. She smiled. The very opposite. The medical staff is calling your lullaby thermal emotional synchrony. The scientists think your voice frequency matches something in the cub's biology. But everyone agrees on one thing: you made them feel safe. Tom rubbed his neck again, embarrassed. I didn't do anything special, ma'am. Just hummed an old tune. My mom used to sing it when I couldn't sleep. The captain nodded. Well, whatever it is, it's working. The cubs are calm for the first time since the evacuation. The crew slept last night, really slept, for the first time in weeks. She paused, her expression softening. You've done something no one else could. Tom didn't know what to say. He just smiled awkwardly. Guess I'm good for more than a mop. The captain laughed quietly. You are, Mr. Reeves. More than you realize. As Tom left the bridge, he noticed crew members watching him with friendly smiles. People he'd never spoken to before nodded as he passed. It felt strange but nice. When he reached the lower decks again, he found a small group of engineers outside the nursery. They had set up microphones and scanners around the door. We're trying to record your lullaby, one of them explained. We want to play it when you're off duty. Tom chuckled. You think that'll work? The engineer shrugged. We can try. He agreed to help them test it. He stood by the nursery door, humming while the engineers adjusted their settings. The cubs, half asleep, turned toward the sound. The machines captured every note, translating it into soft sound waves that filled the room. When the recording ended, they played it back through the speakers. The cubs tilted their heads, listening. A few settled down again, but not as deeply as before. Tom smiled. Nice try, he said. But I think they can tell the difference between a song and a person. That evening, when his shift was done, he passed by the observation window. The cubs were sleeping soundly, the lights dimmed low. One of the medics standing nearby nodded at him. You've got quite the fan club, Mr. Reeves. He looked through the glass. The cubs were all curled up together, their small bodies touching. They're strong, he said softly. Just needed someone to remind them. The medic hesitated, then asked, Do you think you could teach others to do what you do? Tom thought for a moment. Maybe, he said. But it's not something you learn. You just have to care. As he walked back to his quarters, he passed a few crew members who greeted him like an old friend. It felt strange, he'd always been invisible before. Just the janitor. But now people smiled when they saw him. Later that night, he lay in his small bunk, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, he could faintly hear the sound of the cubs breathing over the ship's speakers. The medics kept it on as background sound now, saying it helped them sleep too. Tom closed his eyes and smiled. He hadn't meant to become anyone important. He had only wanted to help some frightened little creatures find rest. But somehow that small act had touched everyone on the ship. Before he drifted to sleep, he murmured, Guess kindness really does travel fast in space. Outside, Aurora's hopes sailed on through the stars, quieter, calmer, and filled with something new that even the machines couldn't measure. Something human. The strange energy field hit Aurora's hope without warning. Lights flickered across the ship, panels buzzed, and a faint shimmer passed through every room. The air felt thick like a storm rolling in. In the nursery, the alien cubs woke suddenly, their cries rising all at once. By the time Tom reached the door, the noise was already echoing down the halls, sharp, frightened sounds that made his heart tighten. He pushed the door open and saw chaos. Blankets were thrown to the floor, tiny claws clutched at the air, and one of the cubs had curled under a cot, trembling. Tom rushed in, waving a hand toward the medics at the door. It's okay, I've got this, he said. They hesitated but stepped back. Everyone knew by now that somehow the cubs trusted him more than anyone else. He moved to the center of the room and knelt down, holding his arms open. Hey, it's all right, he said softly. It's just a bit of turbulence. Nothing to be scared of. But the cubs didn't understand the words. The hum of the ship changed pitch, and the lights flickered again, making their eyes flash with panic. One of them gave a high-pitched cry that made the others start wailing louder. Tom took a deep breath. He needed something, anything, to calm them. His eyes fell on his broom leaning against the wall, the one he always carried. Slowly he picked it up and sat cross-legged on the soft floor. All right, he murmured, let's try something new. He began to tap the handle of the broom gently against the floor. Thump, thump, tap, thump, thump, tap. A slow, steady rhythm, soft but deep enough to be felt. Then, under his breath, he started to hum. It was the same tune he'd sung before, the old Earth lullaby his mother used to hum on rainy nights, but this time he added the beat, a heartbeat rhythm. The sound echoed faintly through the nursery. The cubs paused, their cries fading into small whimpers. One by one they turned toward the sound. Tom kept the rhythm going, slow and calm. That's it, he said quietly. Just breathe, little ones. You're okay. He watched as one cub, the smallest with silver-tipped ears, crawled closer. It tilted its head, listening. Then another followed and another until they all surrounded him again. The air in the room seemed to change. The energy that had felt sharp and restless before now began to soften. The hum of the engines steadied. Even the flickering lights slowed their pulse, matching the rhythm of his broom taps. Outside the nursery, the crew watched from the viewing panel in silence. The captain stood among them, arms crossed but eyes wide. "What's he doing?" whispered one of the engineers. "Something human," said the captain softly. Inside, Tom continued to hum, letting the tune rise and fall like waves. The cubs climbed into his lap and curled up again, their eyes closing slowly. A few of them began to purr, a low, vibrating sound that blended with his humming. Tom felt warmth spread through him, not just from holding them but from the strange calm that filled the room. It was as if the song itself had power, not from any machine, but from the feeling behind it. The broom taps grew slower, softer, until they faded completely. Tom ended the song with a final hum, barely louder than a breath. For a long moment there was silence. Then the ship itself seemed to sigh, the faint hum of its engines steadying completely. The strange energy field outside began to fade, and the lights returned to normal brightness. The storm had passed. Tom looked down. The cubs were all asleep again, their little bodies pressed close together. He smiled faintly and set the broom aside. "Guess we made it," he whispered. The door slid open and the captain stepped inside quietly. "Whatever that was," she said, "it worked." Tom shrugged, still sitting on the floor. "I just made some music. Maybe it gave them something else to listen to besides fear." The captain smiled. "Or maybe you reminded them of home." He looked at her, then down at the sleeping cubs. "Maybe I did." The scientists arrived a few minutes later, scanners in hand. One of them whispered, "There was a measurable change in the energy field inside this room. The frequency of his humming, it stabilized the radiation fluctuations." Tom blinked. "You mean my song fixed the storm?" The scientist grinned. "Maybe not the storm, but it helped the ship ride through it." Tom laughed softly. "Well, that's something." When the scientists left, the captain stayed behind. She leaned against the doorframe and said quietly, "You know, Mr. Reeves, you might be the calmest person on this ship." He smiled tiredly. "I don't know about calm. I just don't like seeing anyone scared." She nodded slowly. "Keep doing what you're doing. Whatever it is, it's keeping us all together." That night, the ship's log recorded something unusual: energy field stabilized. No structural damage. Emotional calm restored in crew and passengers. But what the report didn't capture was the feeling that spread through the halls, a sense of quiet peace. People smiled more that night. The medics worked softly, the engineers joked quietly, and even the captain sat in her chair with a rare look of contentment. In the nursery, Tom sat for a while longer, just watching the cubs sleep. The soft glow of the lights bathed the room in gold. He leaned back against the wall and whispered, "You little ones sure know how to keep life interesting." He didn't notice when one of the cubs stirred and rested its paw on his hand, still half asleep. The tiny gesture made his heart warm. He didn't move it away. Hours later, the crew passed by and saw him still there, the human janitor surrounded by the alien cubs, his broom lying nearby like a forgotten instrument. They said later that something about that image stayed with them. The sight of one ordinary man turning fear into peace with nothing more than kindness, rhythm, and an old Earth song. No machines. No training. Just heart. And though the ship continued through the stars, crossing light years of emptiness, the nursery on Aurora's Hope remained the quietest place on board, the place where calm began. Tom would never call himself a hero. He didn't even think of it as special. But everyone else knew that when the storm hit and the universe seemed ready to fall apart, it was the human janitor who had reminded them all of something simple, that even in deep space, warmth and comfort could still be found. When Aurora's Hope finally reached the new colony, the stars outside burned brighter than ever. The long journey through storms and silence was over. The ship drifted down through the soft blue light of a new world, a green planet with silver oceans and wide open skies. Everyone on board gathered near the viewing windows, whispering in awe. But in the nursery the mood was different. The cubs had felt the change before anyone else. They were restless but not afraid, their tiny ears twitching as the ship's engines slowed. They sensed that something was ending, and something new was beginning. Tom stood by the window watching the planet grow larger. His reflection looked tired but peaceful. He had spent every night for weeks with the cubs, singing and watching over them. They had stopped crying altogether now. They slept soundly through most nights, sometimes snuggling close and purring softly in their dreams. When the final docking announcement came through the speakers, Tom smiled. "Looks like we made it, little ones," he said. At the sound of his voice, the cubs looked up from their nests. They didn't understand the words, but they knew the tone. One by one they ran toward him, squeaking and chirping with excitement. Tom crouched down, laughing softly as they surrounded him, tugging at his sleeves and climbing into his lap. All right, he said with a chuckle. "One at a time. You're all coming off the ship soon." The door opened and the alien caretakers entered, tall, gentle beings with soft gray skin and silver eyes. They carried small harnesses and soft baskets for the cubs. One of them smiled at Tom. "You have taken good care of them," she said in careful English. "They are calm now, healthy. You have done a great thing." Tom shook his head. "Just did what anyone would do." The caretaker's smile grew wider. "Not everyone could do this. The little ones, they call you something in our tongue. It means heart friend." Tom blinked, surprised. "Heart friend, huh? That's a nice name." The caretaker nodded. "Because you gave them peace when even we could not." Tom looked down at the cubs, still holding onto his arms. "Guess they gave me something too," he said quietly. When it came time to leave the ship, the cubs refused to go quietly. They clung to his sleeves and trousers, making tiny chittering noises that sounded almost like words. One of them tried to hide behind his boot, another climbed onto his shoulder, pressing its soft nose against his cheek. Tom laughed and shook his head. "You're making this hard, you know that?" The caretakers tried to take them gently, but the cubs squeaked and wiggled back toward him. Finally, Tom sat down cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by all of them again. "Hey," he said softly, "you're going to a beautiful place now. Trees, grass, open air. No more metal walls or scary storms. You'll love it there." He reached out and stroked the smallest one's fur. "And maybe one day I'll come visit." "All right." The cubs stared at him with big round eyes. They couldn't understand the words, but they could feel the meaning. Their cries faded to quiet hums. Tom smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. The captain stepped into the room then. She wore her full uniform and for once, even her posture seemed softer. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "the colony authorities have requested your presence at the welcoming ceremony. They wish to thank you personally." Tom frowned. "That's not necessary, ma'am. I just did my job." The captain smiled knowingly. "You did far more than that. You brought peace to this ship, and to them." She nodded toward the cubs. Later that day the crew gathered on the landing platform. The air outside was fresh and light, carrying the scent of new soil. The alien caretakers stood waiting with the colony leaders. When Tom stepped out of the ship, the crowd fell silent for a moment, not because of rank or ceremony but out of quiet respect. The captain stepped forward, holding a small silver medal. "For extraordinary compassion and service beyond duty," she said, "we present this to you, Tom Reeves." He blinked and rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I don't think I deserve that. I'm just someone who likes quiet nights." A soft laugh rippled through the crowd. The captain's eyes glimmered. "Then may all your nights be quiet ones, Mr. Reeves." He smiled and shook his head. "Thank you, Captain. But really I don't need a medal. Seeing them safe, that's enough." At that moment the caretakers brought the cubs forward. They had wrapped them in bright woven cloths, ready for their new home. When they saw Tom, they squealed happily and reached out their tiny arms. One of them broke free and scampered toward him, bumping into his boot. Tom crouched and picked it up, holding it close for one last hug. The cub made a soft, rumbling sound, pressing its forehead against his chest. "You take care of each other, all right?" he whispered. "No more crying. You've got a whole world to explore now." The caretakers bowed low before him, a gesture of deep respect in their culture. "Heart friend," one said softly, "your kindness will be remembered. Our people will tell the story of the human who brought peace to our young." Tom smiled faintly. "Just make sure they grow up happy. That's all I want." As he turned to leave, the cubs began to hum, the same soft, gentle rhythm he had taught them. The sound drifted through the air like a lullaby carried on the wind. The crew stopped and listened, their eyes wide with wonder. Even the captain seemed moved. "They're singing your song," she whispered. Tom paused, looking back. The cubs stood together near their caretakers, their eyes bright. The sound was imperfect, a little uneven, but it carried warmth and peace, the kind only kindness could teach. He chuckled softly. "Guess it stuck with them," he said. He walked down the platform, the sound of their humming fading behind him, blending with the gentle wind of the new world. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. That night, as the Aurora's Hope prepared to leave orbit, Tom stood by the window of his small cabin. Below him, the new colony glowed softly against the darkness. Somewhere down there, the cubs were sleeping, maybe dreaming of the song he'd hummed so many times. The captain's voice came through the intercom, gentle and proud. "All crew prepare for departure. Our next journey begins." Tom smiled, leaning against the glass. "Quiet nights," he whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." As the ship lifted away, the stars filled the sky again. But this time they didn't feel so distant. Somewhere among them, Tom knew, there were hearts that had once been afraid, now full of peace because one human had cared enough to stay. And that, he thought, was enough.